I landed in the Vancouver airport. My friend Zenon was on the plane before me. We met in Vancouver separately because we didn't want to have anyone follow us from Toronto, anyone from the Chinese consulate.
He walked by me wearing a shirt with a big Canadian flag on it, and he just kind of pointed at it like, go buy one, because I didn't have anything, but I didn't want to go get one. Because I didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to sit there. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I was just too scared.
November 15th, 2001. Two Canadians, Joel and Zenon, boarded their flights to Beijing. For them, this was a journey full of uncertainty.
This is real. This is not a fun story. I'm going into a police state, which is attacking and killing the thing that I defend. And I've just called them murderers to the whole world on the media, okay? They don't like me.
We have had a recent report of 15 women tortured to death in the northeastern province, and just a few days ago we got in the same province 10 men tortured to death in the same province, and these are all on the same day. So these are mass killings. These are not just rare instances where some.
Their entire life is bombarded with persecution, from their workplaces to their schools. They're dehumanized in the eyes of Chinese society. If they go for legal representation, the lawyers are persecuted. There's nowhere else for them to go except into the public to show their innocence. So they go to Tiananmen Square. And as Westerners, we must support them.
Zenon and Joel practice Falun Gong, a spiritual discipline that originated in China, which was then persecuted by the country's atheist regime. Besides them, over 30 people from 11 other countries left their homes and boarded flights to Beijing. Other than their travel companions, most had no idea who else was on the same fateful journey.
是有一天在公园练功，就是站在那这种装法，就觉得哎呀，我想去中国，因为他们他们自己在中国都是去天安门，那我们能不能也自己去一趟？
Peter grew up in a small village in the former East Germany and later moved to Frankfurt. He was a wrestler since childhood, but was more interested in martial arts and Chinese culture. He was amazed how the simple and slow exercises of Falun Gong gave him such strong energy. The aches and pains from his old wrestling injuries vanished.
德国本身有好几个人也想去，那么一旦去了的时候，决定了，也是跟其他的欧洲的国家的人说了，你要不要去？我们就是订个机票，然后我们在天安门就是坐还是站，我们没有什么计划，也没有什么想好的一个办法，但是就是去了是去了，就有一些人就说 OK， 我们就去吧。
Somebody make me a phone call from Germany, a friend I know, and she asked me, Peter, we are going to Tiananmen Square. Do you want to go? And I just told her, okay, so it's now then. I've been waiting for this. Of course I will go.
For 2 years, Pirio had thought about going to Tiananmen Square. Before the persecution started, Pirio thought of China as her second home. Since 1995, she and her friends had been spending their Christmas holidays in China every year. They did Falun Gong exercises in parks and shared their practice experiences. But since the beginning of the crackdown, Pirio lost contact with all her Chinese friends. Pirio's friend Ene had also been to China. In October 1999, she was at a secret press conference in Beijing, where her friends, at great risk of being arrested themselves, revealed to media what practitioners were suffering in the persecution.
And we hold this conference, the press conference, one Chinese girl called Ding Yan. She told her story how she had been persecuted, handcuffed, and she showed for the foreign media. And they also did show the practice movements. And also a small child, I remember a small boy together with their parents. And he also told me that he can't go to school because he practiced Falun Gong, so he's not allowed to go to school. And he felt he was like 10 years, something, 9-10 years old. I felt they were very brave to do this because I know what could happen and what was going on.
因为其实我们所求的并不多，我们只是想要有个安定的修炼的环境。我们平时也做得好了，没有干涉。
Most who spoke out at the press conference disappeared or were imprisoned. Ding Yan was tortured to death at Chengde prison. Tsai Ming-tao, the interpreter at the press conference, was killed too. It wasn't a hard decision for Rene to protest at Tiananmen Square.
When I first heard about the trip to China, it was through my friend Myrna. And she just came up to me out of the blue and just said, "Do you want to go to China?" And I just said, yes. And at that time, I didn't have any thoughts. You know, I didn't have to consider would I go or not, because I was already looking for anything that I could do to help raise awareness about the persecution and trying to help stop these innocent people getting killed.
The first time I read about a practitioner dying in China, it was the case of Miss Chen Zixu, an elderly woman, and she'd been beaten and tortured to death. And already the persecution was unbelievable enough, but here someone was killed for doing the same thing that I do, Falun Gong, freely, in Australia. And I cried. I cried when I read her story and read what happened to her. It was so sad, it was so devastating for me.
Kay and Kate planned to go to Tiananmen too. This would be their first time going to China. If it weren't for their practice of Falun Gong, they wouldn't have had much connection to that place.
If I could see the world through your eyes, would I judge you the way that I have?
Kate grew up in a small town that only had one Chinese family. When she entered her teens, she became addicted to drugs and alcohol. Kate never imagined that Falun Gong would help her to heal. Her friend Kay discovered free Falun Gong instructions in a newspaper ad while searching for meditation to cure her illnesses.
I've had so many health benefits, so many spiritual benefits and improvements in my relationships with everyone, my family and friends, that what would happen if someone asked me to stop practicing Falun Gong? I wouldn't do it. So I could understand why the practitioners in China wouldn't either, and why they would go and appeal and even risk their lives. And that was when I had the opportunity to go to Tiananmen Square. That's why I went. It was something that I could do.
I thought more about the Chinese citizens who were they were deceived by the Chinese regime into thinking that we were a cult, and that was so unfair. I really want to talk to them, to have them see, look, we are white, we are from so many countries, and we practice Falun Gong. Do you know that? I think a lot of Chinese people didn't know.
I've been working as a film editor for many years, and very often I had interviews with Jewish people, and they were speaking about the Nazi regime, and I understood so deeply how much manipulation comes out from media, and how the Chinese government is limiting its own people.
For me, it really was a matter of life and death that I was contemplating.
Lillian was in Beijing the year before. She frequently visited Tiananmen Square and witnessed police pushing, beating, and arresting Falun Gong practitioners.
The one thing that I remember very clearly is one of the times when I was there, I saw them arrest and beat a female practitioner, and there was like a police barrier type of fence, and there was a policeman who pushed her against it and did this very violently many times until she just fell and collapsed on the ground, like he crushed her. And that was very, very shocking. And later, when I came back to the UK, I learned that on that day a practitioner died on the square, and I had the feeling really it was her. It was so unreal. They were like beasts. It wasn't like humans.
At the time, the decision for me to go to China was the most serious decision that I'd ever made. And I know everyone had difficulties to overcome, obstacles. Should I tell my parents what will happen if I'm arrested there? You know, what will happen to work and at school? And everybody that I was speaking to, and I too had some difficulties and was low on money and had to sell possessions, including one of my saxophones, to be able to go to China.
Born in Israel, Li Shai studied Chinese at a college in Los Angeles. Before he decided to go to Tiananmen, he called to tell his parents.
We saw how well, the experience of practicing Falun Gong has been for him in terms of his health and becoming more calm, and we saw the benefits it brought to him, but we never thought that he would take the step of going to China. I was totally shocked and became, very worried. I was afraid that, and the first thing I told him was, what if they frame you with drugs or something in the suitcase? I mean, they can fabricate any kind of crime, and then you'll go to a camp, labor camp, and we'll never see you again. We'll never know what happened to you. I had this very deep existential fear that something will happen to him, and, it was just very scary.
我跟他们挂电话以后，睡觉第二天早上，我心里是那种莫名其妙的能感觉一个母亲失去她的儿子的滋味。我不知道为什么，但是我很明确，就是那个感觉非常痛。然后我写一封信给我父母，然后我跟他们说，我从小你们从小教养的时候，就是跟我讲这些人权的故事，跟我讲 Martin Luther King， 跟我讲甘地，跟我讲这些非暴力者的他们的忍耐力和他们舍弃的东西。那我不是 Martin Luther King， 我也不是甘地，但是那些历史人物，如果他们因为他们的父母的怕，不做他们历史上应该做的一切，那我们这个世界会是什么样的世界？然后我就发了这个信给他们，然后就睡觉了。第二天早上我起来，我心里有很明确的一个感觉，我知道我父母给我回答，而且我知道那个回答是很正面的。我就打开了我的信箱，果然有他们的 email， 然后写了一句话：我们了解，我们支持你。
The plan spread quietly from friend to friend to avoid Chinese authorities finding out. The plan was to gather at the flagpole at 2 p.m., November 20th, 2001, to hold a big banner together.
We arrived in Beijing at the Beijing airport and got to see a little bit of the city. And when we went to our hotel, there were just a small group of there's a small group of hotels where the Westerners stay, and there were police at the escalators and in the lobby, and we were being watched the whole time. So we were very cautious. We come into the hotel room, we close the blinds, we keep the lights off, we speak to each other in a very low voice. And we were just very cautious. We wanted to make sure that we'd have the opportunity to make our appeal later that week.
我们得做到最后一步，能坐下来，即使谁被抓起来了，别人还得去，继续下去。
And we had a meeting beforehand, before our actual event, with a few of those people who were coordinating and planning and just talking through what would happen on the square.
My role in the event was to film, was to secretly videotape the entire event. To do this, I had to figure out how, because I knew there was going to be police all over the square, and if I was standing there with a video camera, I was going to get arrested as well. So it took me a good week to figure out how to do it, and I sewed it into my strap of the backpack. I put a hole in the backpack so the lens could fit perfectly in my backpack, and then the string went down the strap into the back of the backpack and into a camcorder. It took me a good 4 days to master how to use the camera.
因为有这几天的时间，我们担心他们如果我们啥都不做，一直在酒店，他们会有一些想法。如果监控我们，会觉得啊，这些人在干嘛？所以我们就跟其他的来旅游的人一样，去故宫、去长城、去三陵，然后也去了天安门广场1-2次。然后过程中有去了一个做玉的戒指和其他的一些就是玉这么一个玉厂，然后去那边让他。我买了一个戒指给我女朋友，说如果我这一次能回去，我就跟她订婚。
There was a restaurant that we went to a few times in Beijing before going to Tiananmen, and the night before we went to appeal, we went there for the last time. There was Kate, myself and Chris from Australia and John from America. And we'd become friends with a waiter, and we had a lot of fun making jokes and trying to communicate in English and broken Chinese. And as we were leaving, we wanted to tell him about why we were there, because we knew we wouldn't see him again. So Kate and I had made these little cards with 3 Chinese characters on them that said Zhen, Shan, Ren, truthfulness, compassion and forbearance. That's what it meant in English. We handed him this card at the doorway, and straight away his face turned from this big smile down to panic, fear. His hands were shaking, holding the card. He's looking up at us 4 Westerners, really tall, and back at this card, and up at us and back at the card. And we said to him, Falun Gong is good, and what the Chinese government is saying is wrong. And it took some time for him to change. His face started to relax. He eventually took the card. But he took the card and he put it very close inside his shirt pocket, and then he started to smile again. And it was like seeing how much the propaganda in China had made people afraid of these 3 words that are so good: truth, compassion and tolerance. And he waved us off all the way down the street, smiling and waving and watching us as we walked to the corner. And I think that made an impact on him. It certainly did on me.
I am. Oh, we're walking?
Keep your footing, sir. I'm in the right spot. I kept it recording.
Perfect.
Okay. We've come here to the Great Wall to hang our banners. In my heart, I kind of think of the Great Wall as a nice place to do it, because a lot of people from around China come to the Great Wall and they'll be able to see the banner. I made this banner in my hotel room last night. It was very tedious, and I did my best. So when Chinese people see it, that they're touched by it. It doesn't look just like a makeshift banner, although it is. This is my banner. Chinese media, day in and day out, was spreading so much propaganda about Falun Gong. But so many people had so many real benefits where their health got so much better and they were able to continue living, and enough people around them knew that the campaign against Falun Gong was failing. But that changed in the beginning of 2001.
The day before Chinese New Year 2001 in Tiananmen Square, 5 people set themselves on fire. China's state-run media immediately declared that they were Falun Gong practitioners. Graphic footage was televised repeatedly. A new wave of hate propaganda was launched against Falun Gong.
当时就是，哎呀，又加个更字儿，就是又一波的那种铺天盖地的那种诽谤那种新闻又来了，就是那种压力啊，家里头那个小区里面居委会呀，就是看你的眼神啊，就是周围邻居看你的那个眼神啊，你知道吗？就那种。
After the self-immolation incident, the Chinese Communist regime intensified its anti-Falun Gong propaganda. Even elementary school students had to declare their support. More and more Falun Gong practitioners were expelled from their workplaces and schools and thrown into prisons, labor camps, and brainwashing centers.
But it struck me as being extremely suspicious, if not totally phony, okay, to create these incidents and then point them, to use them as examples for propaganda purposes. And I think in this case, there were reporters who questioned this whole scenario, who were in China, and who basically cast doubt on the whole scenario, showed that it was staged and was phony.
Washington Post journalist Philip Pan went to investigate the backgrounds of the people involved in the self-immolation. Neighbors of Liu Chunling, one of the people who died in the incident, said she worked in a nightclub. No one ever saw her practice Falun Gong. In an analysis of the footage of the burnings, Liu is walking. The fire on her is mostly extinguished when all of a sudden a heavy object hits her head and knocks her to the ground. A man in a military coat suspected of throwing the object is also captured on camera. However, state-run media reported that Liu died from the flames.
They turned Tiananmen Square into a movie set, and they used movie techniques of close-up angles, of many different cameras to try to create something. But that obviously raised more questions than it answered, because it wasn't just a news cameraman happening to be there and coming across something. It was staged.
When I thought about the self-immolation incident that happened in China and the impact that it had in China, I felt that my presence there would definitely make them have to step back for a moment and reevaluate the situation, and then start taking the information in again from a fresh perspective, rather than all this piled on confusion. And from that point of view, I felt like I was doing my part to erase the impact of the self-immolation incident.
那天去天安门之前去前门，然后在那边买了一个红豆芝麻球，好像这一辈子第一次去了，第一次吃这个东西。然后咱觉得这个东西 可能是我这一辈子吃的最好吃的这么一个东西，然后去天安门上广场了。
And remind myself that I was there for other people. And selflessness is a very powerful, powerful thing. And to focus very hard on melting into that principle. And after doing that for a number of hours, I was very calm. I felt like each step I took like shook the entire earth underneath me. I was just so grounded.
I saw Paulina, whom I knew from California, walk by, and her two young daughters arm in arm. And I was very surprised to see her. I didn't realize that she was actually going to come to China.
他们那时候没有邀请我参加这件事，因为他们担心我是东方人脸孔，也许对我会有安全问题。不过既然我知道了呢，我也很想去。刚好那时候我的先生去北京参加会议，然后我的女儿又要过生日，那我想要么我们就全家人到北京去旅游，这样我就去了，起码我想我可以帮他们照相。
Joel from Canada, who was there, and I saw him there. He was posing as a tourist, and so I knew Joel really well, but I walked right by him because I knew that okay, he's we can't kind of enmesh him in what we're doing here. He's a tourist, so we just kind of walked right past him.
And we looked around and then spotted Myrna, who was just from Australia, and she was walking towards us. Then there was another woman came from Europe, and we recognized her from the airport. And then another person came, and we all started saying to each other, "Are you? Are you? Are you?" And nodding, and there was a kind of excitement because it was real. It was like, oh, this is really happening now.
我看到那些学员他们站好，然后 Adam Leining 呢，他就站出来要给他们照合体照的时候呢，我也站起来做好准备。那时候呢，就看到那个横幅呢，一瞬间打开了。那时刚好那个太阳照到横幅上，所以就看到那个金光一闪。我一看到呢，我就很自然的照了那张照片。
I just felt it was the most righteous thing I have ever done, to sit there and stand up for truthfulness, compassion, forbearance, to stand up for those 3 simple words and for the practitioners in China.
When the banner came out of the bag, it was so tall that we had to hold it high above our heads, and all I could see was just this golden fabric in front of me. And I was just feeling happy that we were able to do it.
I was between the character Jen and Shan. And when I saw the photo of that day, I could see the little bumps in the banner where my hands were. And I felt really proud because they were holding so strong and they were pushing so strong to hold the banner.
我那时候我就意识到，我只有机会照一张照片，而且照完之后必须马上离开现场。那时候带着女儿离开的时候呢，我就看到那个摆摊的那个照相的人呢，其实他们是便衣警察，因为他们拿着话筒呢，赶那些游客离开。
Vans started coming in, beeping their horn like crazy. Police started blowing their whistles all over the square. And the vans came and they started to circle the practitioners. And plainclothes police that I didn't even know were there were in the square, and they were they were pushing away tourists and people with cameras, and they were grabbing cameras from people.
The banner started to get pulled and pulled and pulled. I kept holding and holding, and then it got tied up into a rope, and then there was a big tug of war between the police and whatnot.
听见他们就开始在喊，用中文喊，不知道在喊什么，然后听见他们在把我们旁边的人开始抓走。
Suddenly the policeman come to pull me by my hair because I don't want to stand up.
我一看，睁开眼睛，但是行夫和我之间本来有2行人嘛，那2人都已经不在了。
One by one, along the row of us holding the banner, practitioners were being pulled off and taken into vans and other vehicles that surrounded us.
Chris was trying to brace himself from being put into the van like this. And so one of the policemen took one of his fingers and snapped it back and actually broke his finger.
Suddenly, I was the last one, and I was holding the banner, and I pulled it down lower so that I could look over onto the other side and see what was on the other side of the banner. And I saw I was holding the character for compassion, Shan. And in front of me were 5 to 6 police officers coming closer and closer. And I thought, let them see what I'm being arrested for. And I'm not going to let them take this banner. And so I held on really tight, and they came in and they started pulling me and pushing me. They were ripping my hair and pulling my bag to try and make me fall over.
And then I remembered I had the banner in my leg. And I said, you know, don't leave the group. You're here as part of a larger group. This is not about you. And then I said, well, if it's not about me, then it's about making sure that the whole world hears Falun Dafa. So I got clear in that moment, and I said, all right, I'm going. And I got up, and I started to pull the banner on my leg, and I started to run. When the police got to me, it was just threw me right to the ground. And I remember catching the ground, the cement smacking my hand. And I was like, ooh, I almost broke my face. And then they picked me up, and there was 3 of them. But because I was fighting, they all had to hold my arms and my body so they couldn't cover my mouth. And so I started hollering and hollering.
And I saw the practitioners being pushed in the vans, and then one by one the vans started to leave. And I could see the practitioners in the windows of the vans, and I continued to, continue to be righteous for them and send my energy to help them be strong. And just like that, it was over. I grabbed a rickshaw actually and went back to the hotel. And as soon as I got into the lobby, I went into the bathroom. I didn't even go up to my hotel room. I went into the bathroom in the lobby, I locked the door, and I got the camera out of the bag, and I rewinded it, and my heart was pounding out of my chest because I wanted to make sure that I had this footage. And I looked at the footage, and it was there. The footage was there.
Joel rushed to a FedEx office and shipped the recordings back home, getting the news out of China. He then boarded a plane back to Canada.
We got a phone call from Sarah, his girlfriend at the time, and later became his wife, telling us that she heard they were arrested. And we pretty much expected it because Lishai told us in advance that there is a good chance they'll be arrested. And then I had the mission because I think Lishai told me what I'm supposed to do. So I immediately channeled all my fear and all my worries and all my concern into action. And since I was a professor of communication, I had many, many connections with journalists and media people. And I started making phone calls to all the editorial offices of major newspapers and television channels in Israel and making connections. And I was interviewed in many, many channels.
I held the press conference. At the end, I was taking some questions. And one of the reporters actually asked me if I was afraid for Zenon. And I said to him, I wasn't afraid. but I was concerned that they wouldn't let him come home, and I was concerned that no one knew where he was. Counselor General's office told me was that China is not responding to any of the embassies, and at the earliest it will not be until this evening before they can confirm or deny any reports at all.
The two mothers' fears were not groundless. Just one day before Zenon and the others were on the square, the mother of Yang Shegui, an army veteran from Lanzhou City, published an open letter online calling for help for her son who was being tortured because he practiced Falun Gong. In the same month, international media reported that Hu Qingyun, a superior court judge from Jiangxi province, died in custody after serving just 2 months of a 7-year sentence for his belief in Falun Gong.
我在天津的劳教所里面，就是被迫害、电击造成的就是很大的伤害，就是这个是我当时的就是被电击脓包化脓，然后腐蚀的，现在这是跟肋骨粘连了，后背也是。后背也是，后背就是电完之后就是一个大脓包，脓包最后破了，最后把脊椎骨就腐蚀没了，最后导致了高位截瘫。在2次手术之后吧，就是恢复练功，然后恢复到现在。
I've had discussions in the past about China's approach to the Falun Gong. This time I've been particularly focusing on how they treat individual Falun Gong members. And my message is that they have human rights that must be respected, that we get many cases of complaints of ill treatment, of torture, of heavy sentences for wanting to simply express membership of Falun Gong in a peaceful way.
As the news spread, the protesters were being beaten and thrown into police vans. They had become a thorn in the side of the regime's campaign against Falun Gong.
I won't get in the van then, okay. So I pushed my legs down into the ground and I'm grounding, because I practice martial arts, so I know how to ground myself. So grounding myself into the ground, and all of a sudden I felt this smash in my face, and I just sting shoot up into my brain, and I just start falling over, and then I'm getting kicked and hit into the van.
In the van where I was, there was just Zenon and I, and the police had Zenon. They had his t-shirt over his head and down over his shoulders and arms, so he couldn't move and he couldn't see. And they were all crowded around him, beating into his bare back. And at that moment, I think all the courage that I'd mustered up and all the plans that I'd had, you know, for how brave I was going to be, they were out the window for a little bit.
I thought, I have nothing to do in this van. I'm going to talk to the Chinese people and tell her what we came here for, that we are Falun Dafa practitioners. I said it in Chinese. 我们是Falun Gong学员，我是从法国来的什么的。There was a very young policeman in front of me. He was very upset that I would dare to do that. So he took the sandal of my bag and tried to strangle me on the seat. And then I thought, wow, he's so young, and he's like, it's automatic for him. He does that every day.
我把我就是扔到，真的是扔到车里边，是那个面包车，那个大的车，然后有人在椅子上已经满满的，然后把我扔在他们身上，然后送到Tiananmen的派出所，把我放在一个最后好像是走廊的右边最后一个房间，那个真的像电影一样，就是有一个我们英文叫 good cop 和 bad cop， 有一个警察特别凶，有一个警察是几乎不说话的，就是面部表情稍微善一点，也不是特别好，但是只是稍微麻木一点。然后他第一件事是好护照给我，然后我跟他说我没有犯什么错，你根本本来不应该抓我，凭什么给你我的护照？我是美国公民，我是在那边打坐，你宪法允许我打坐。然后他就看我不给护照，他就开始打我，然后我的那个下巴出来了，就是之后是几乎不能说话一天。然后他就抓着我的鼻子拉出来，然后再扔下去，然后要踢我的下身啊。 那个警察的眼神，他当时打我的眼神是那种恨我是西方人，他的眼神是你不是西方人，我现在把你杀了，我恨我不行，我不能。
We were all taken to a cell in the basement under Tiananmen Square. And when I first got in there, I couldn't believe that they could shove us all, so many people, into one very tiny cell. And then as I started to look around the walls of the cell, I could see marks that looked like someone's fingers had run their hands down, and there was some like dirty kind of bloody stains there.
There was a drain hole in the bottom on the concrete floor, and it was as if you could just wash everything off, blood or any beatings or other damage, just wash it off all down the hole. And I sat there and leaned against the wall, and I felt uncomfortable being in a prison cell for what? For holding a banner that said truth, compassion and forbearance.
There were obviously no windows. I imagined immediately how Chinese practitioners would be treated there. They can do everything. There are no testimonies. Nobody would hear. Nobody would see anything. Only those who are with them. And I felt they are lost. They are completely lost.
在那下面，我听到女生的喊声，很自然的，就是我自己的心里很难过，因为他们真的在喊，就是害怕或者被打或者被弄到地上去了。我们的一个德国的那个妮娜也被弄到地上去了啊，因为她不想交她的护照。
It was dark outside when we were taken from the prison cell. And we were put onto these buses. There was lots of buses, and on each bus there was only a few practitioners, but so many police. And we, on my bus, we had to sit by the window, and the police lined the centre rows and on either front and behind us. And I sat next to a policewoman, and she's stared ahead, straight ahead like all the others. I started to talk to her about why I went to China. And I told her that about my how I have in Australia I have a good job, I have a company car, I have my boss supports me, my family supports me, they know I'm here. And after a while she turned to me and said, shut up. And I was shocked because I didn't even know if she really understood English, but at that point I knew. And I turned back to her and I said, do you realize I came all the way from Sydney, Australia to China just to tell you that Falun Gong's good? Do you really think I'm going to shut up?
They took us from Tiananmen Square to police station in Tiananmen Square, and then later by bus to a kind of Secret Service hotel. That was my impression. Me as a German, I felt like caught by the Stasi, which is German Eastern Security Service.
What looks like a hotel, but is actually a public security facility. It's all, two-way mirrors and rooms, and it's just crawling with police and who knows who, different agents and whatnot. So we were held in this public security hotel overnight, and we were watched by 40 or 50 young police at all times.
所以把我们分两个房间，然后我们那个房间有一个前面有很长的一张桌子，它后面有5-6个警察坐在那边，然后靠门和门旁边的那个墙都是警察，最多的时候有好几十个，比我们应该有多2-3倍。然后他们开始审问，审问他们是一个一个审问的，然后招我的那个警察他开始问题一开始比较正常，你叫什么名字？你的地址是什么？你是什么时候来了？然后你打算待多久啊？你为什么来了？然后又开始问谁给你钱，哪个政府送你的？
It was just they had these concepts and they were trying to find any way to figure out how we were so, I guess, effective in being able to turn up and hold the banner up there without them noticing. But they just couldn't understand that it was actually because this is really coming from the heart. It's not something that you could pay someone to go and do.
And I simply answered the questions honestly. The purpose of the trip was to try to clarify the truth, to tell the Chinese people about Falun Gong, to tell them about the persecution, about what the government was doing to Chinese citizens. After the policeman interrogated me, I signed the police report, which was all written in Chinese. I sat down and I had second thoughts about whether I should have signed it.
他写完了让我签字，我说首先这是中文我看不懂，然而我也没有犯什么错，然后所以我没有必要签什么字。另外，你现在那么多录像机，你在那边我签字，你录像，你后来说我是认罪啊或者什么的，所以我根本不签字。
So I walked up a few minutes later to the head police who was sitting up in the front of the room, and I told him that I wanted to review some of the things that I had said, and if he could kind of review what the statement said. And after pausing for a few moments, he looked through the forms that had been that he had in his hand, and he brought me mine and showed it to me, and then I immediately grabbed it and tore it up.
And one of the policemen got really angry and came over to him and gave him to the head like this. He snapped his head back and started yelling in Chinese.
然后德国来的 Peter 站起来说：“我们看见你做什么，我会告诉世界你在做什么。你再打，我们全世界都知道你。”
然后呢，他就放下了那个美国的学员，然后他就把我抓起来，弄到那个墙上，就是很恶劣的一个状态。
他跟你说什么？
他就是问了我一个问题，他问我你知道必死是什么感觉？我就说不知道。
后来那个人被他的领导，好像是610啊或者谁，他穿的不是警察的衣服，把他赶走。我估计他担心那个人已经控制不了自己了，再往前走就是像对中国人一样对待的，他会就是把我们这样的处理。
You could feel the longer we were there with them, the whole atmosphere would lighten up and they would become very relaxed. And I really worry for them. Of all the things that have happened in China, I see them as being among the greatest victims. I mean, look at what they're being forced to do. I didn't anticipate this, but I hope, our appeal in China had a lasting effect, on them. Because they didn't know Falun Gong very well, and they were being fed, the lies that are just ridiculous, okay? And they're being forced to act this out, and they're just kids, so.
And I was at the time, I was chairing a panel. There was an event at the university and I was chair of the panel. And I remember I walked into the panel and I started the panel and I said, I apologize, I'm keeping my phone open because my son is in prison in China and I'm waiting to hear about his release. So I'm apologizing, but my phone has to stay open. And in the middle of the panel, I got my phone rang and I said, excuse me, I'm running out. And I ran out and we heard that he was released.
After 20 hours, they were sent to the airport and deported.
送到飞机上，一直送到我的位置，我坐在那个位置正好是 aisle seat，然后警察站在那边，我就坐在那边。他一直等到所有的人上飞机快要起飞的时候，那个警察才离开了，他们关门了。然后所有的飞机上的客人都在看我这个是什么样的人，挺紧张的那个表情。然后我看前面他们放的 China Daily， 就是中共的英文报纸，有一篇文章说有一批法轮功学员是来到天安门，他们是外地势力什么反华势力送的，然后给钱的，然后我们很好的对待他们，把他们放在酒店， 然后我看我这个下巴是动不了的，然后那个是一身伤，鼻子都断了，然后那个 Chris 也是，他2个手指头好像是断了，或者肋骨啊什么的，然后有没有鞋子啊？我看哇，真的撒谎有那么容易本来。
Actually, at that time, I had thought I had failed to some extent. I didn't get to complete my job, but then I transferred planes in Tokyo, and somehow on the shuttle bus from one plane to the other, from the plane to the airport, I was talking to a woman next to me, a Chinese woman, and somehow the conversation developed. I said, I was in Beijing yesterday on Tiananmen Square with other people who practice Falun Gong, and she said, "Oh, I practice Falun Gong. I heard about that. That was so great what you guys did." And she started crying, and I think I was crying eventually too. So I actually met another practitioner, a Chinese practitioner, on the same plane as me, who had already heard about it. So that alone told me that there was something successful here, that the news got out.
是这样，我们的那个劳教所里面，就是每天晚上啊，就是必须得开着灯睡，开着门，还有2个值夜班的。这个值夜班的就没事嘛，就配个半导体。我正好是在上铺，门在那边嘛，我是在上铺，他就在那边门口，放的声音挺大，正好播那个新闻，正好让我听见，就播放，俺看北京，然后就是整个这一段新闻，就是有36个就是外国的什么敌对什么分子，什么法轮功，什么如何在就是一通批吧，就他们那批我没听见，我就听那个你知道那个笑着眼泪就出来了，你知道吗？你就是无形的那种鼓励，你知道吗？就是那种你在这个过程当中我就说我自己，我没经历过这么多东西，没经历过这么多事情，在这时候就发现还有同修不畏生死，就是过来还去给你去帮助这。
I'm between Sean.
See, most of us didn't know. We never met before. So we just came together on the square, and then we were locked up together in this situation, but it was so grueling, and everyone was having their own challenges. So I think it wasn't really a time where we sat and got to know each other, and then we all went home. So this is the first time actually coming together. And
for me, actually, many people I didn't know till today, because really it was just. But today, during the parade, I feel like old war veterans meet together. I got. It's not that, but it's a feeling like this. Maybe we know us previous life, I don't know, but I just got that feeling today, and I was already almost crying.
I've thought of going back to China many times. No, I've envisioned myself getting off the plane many times. I did the same thing every time, as I just knelt down and I kissed the ground.